So we all love Donkey Kong Country here, or at least we give it the respect it deserves. But there's one part of the franchise often ignored in the present day, that being Donkey Kong's handheld adventures. People know about them, but compared to the mainline stuff, they almost go under the radar at times, and heck, some of them went under mine until making this video. So today, they get their time to shine as we check out the Donkey Kong Land trilogy and beyond, but let's stick to the stuff on Game Boy for now. I always felt the term land denoted a smaller adventure than what you'd see on consoles, with things in it you wouldn't find anywhere else, a bit weirder and more experimental. Mario Land, Wario Land, Donkey Kong Land, they're the only games with the land subtitle, but you know what I mean. Now, when getting footage for these, I tried my hand at emulation for the first time and it got a bit messy. I tried configuring controllers, getting the proper borders and color palettes, but it started to feel like work and I want to have fun with this. So some of the footage here is from online playthroughs, which honestly I'm no stranger to, but credit goes to them where applicable. Cool? Cool. For the DKC video, I didn't feel like going into the development of the series much cause everyone's done it at this point. You've probably heard the story a million times by now, but I've barely seen a soul talk about the Land game's creation, so I'll do that here. Firstly, we need to sing the praises of programmer Paul Makachek, who joined Rare in 1988 and is still there as of this video. He's got quite the memory bank regarding the studio and its work, and he shared a couple of Donkey Kong Land stories over the years. It all started in 1991 when Rare co-founder Tim Stamper told him to make a Game Boy port of Battletoads. Makachek suggested an original offshoot instead, as it'd be made from the ground up either way, and it would probably sell more than a straight port. Though funnily, this game was just called Battletoads, and in '93 they made Ragnarok's World, which actually was a straight port of NES Toads, with that title added just to screw with people. Anyways, that worked out well, so later when Tim wanted Donkey Kong on the gray brick, they went down the offshoot road again, with a bit more elbow grease. Game Boy can't be compared to SNES power-wise, but their basic architecture is pretty similar. Transferring art assets was a relative breeze, and they used the same rendering tools as the DKC team. Land also ran on a souped-up Battletoads engine, which Makachek worked on for 3 weeks. Starting out, the team consisted of him alone, later growing to over 15 people. And though DKC was in production, they still went ahead with making new enemies, mechanics, you name it. Hearing all of that blows my mind, and Makachek is nothing short of a technical trooper. As I said in my DKC video, the first Donkey Kong Land was my only extension into the DK series in my early youth. I got the cart secondhand and knew nothing of it. Didn't have the box or the manual, but I'd say the manual's kinda mandatory. It's the only place you'll get all the names of the stages and enemies, and the most meta plot in the whole series. Shortly after the events of DKC, Cranky's telling DK and Diddy people only liked that game for its fancy graphics and music, but the boys say those didn't matter. People liked it because it was just plain fun. So Cranky bets they can't replicate that success on an 8-bit monochromatic console like Game Boy, and calls up K. Rool to steal the Banana Horde again. That's when the two realized they screwed up big time. DK even had plans to watch the Banana Bowl tomorrow, but there's no way he's letting the old man have the last laugh. And given this game sold like, what, 4 million copies? I'd say they got that monkey off their back. Where was he in the sequels, huh? Nowhere, that's where. This game's devotion to the all-new is my favorite thing about it. When you hear that opening theme, you know you're not in Donkey Kong Country anymore. During development, Nintendo Power showcased all the new stuff, and a lot of it differed from the final game. Enemies had different names, there was this hatted Kong fellow, an animal buddy named Rambunctious. They stressed a lot of this wasn't finalized, but seeing a render, it just hurts even more. It would have been great seeing this little guy in more games, before getting relegated to a Smash Brothers trophy. Then there's things done here before Country 2 had a crack at them, like exploring K. Rool's ship and climbing on rope ladders. This was my DKC 2 before I emerged from that rock of mine. Then there were the new enemies, and sometimes I forget those used to be a big selling point for games. I mean, this magazine hyped up Fangfish as the biggest thing since sliced bread. King of the deep, prehistoric killing machine, uses ant bones to digest its food. Warg! Okay, dial it back. Seeing Hogwash the first time felt so alien. I mean, I can take talking monkeys and giant beavers, but thinking about these in DKC proper, it feels weird. And then there's Nemo. I didn't know what a Nautilus was at the time. All I knew is that it wanted me dead and it terrified me. Thinking about 16-bit hogwash is unsettling enough, but this, no thank you, no thank you. Even the familiar had new spins on them. Zingers fly vertically, which makes them even more wasp-like, and I hate that. And Kong letters don't net you extra lives here. That's done by Kong tokens you cash in at bonus rooms, which I didn't know for the longest time. I just knew them as the coins that make a noise akin to somebody letting it rip. But Kong letters are more important than ever. They're your only way of saving the game. Comparing it to GB Battletoads, Makachek said that was done to cut players a break as land was a bigger game, but I'm of two minds with this. If you're really good, you could potentially save after every stage, which not even the SNES games let you do as easily. But otherwise, this could give you some trouble, and some letters are only found in bonus rooms, so even those are mandatory. You could go back to level 1 or something for a quick save, and with save states, it's pretty much a non-issue, but I prefer how the SNES games did it. Probably why they just did that for the sequels. Talking technical feats and details, I was impressed you could ride animal buddies when the sequels just had you turn into them from the get-go. The latter does work better, but hey, they proved it was possible. The Kong's ducking and death animations are here, and steel kegs are still rideable, another thing the sequels didn't bother with. Water levels have little crabs and starfish in the background who just stare at you. Never noticed that before, probably too busy swimming away from Nemo, but I love it. And I also gotta say, I love the jumping off enemies noise here. When I played Banjo-Kazooie and saw the duo playing Game Boy on the file select screen, I instantly knew what the game was on sound alone. They changed up the sound in the sequels, and I don't know why, but it doesn't sound as fun. Speaking of sound, the music is amazing. David Wise did the lion's share, but serious props goes to Graham Norgate too. The 8 tracks he did here, there is nothing else on Game Boy that sounds like this. Which one's the best? All of them. The cloud theme, mountain theme, and everything in Big Ape City. A big reason why that's my favorite world. The construction site theme is unparalleled. I used it in a film project in high school, I liked it that much. For Wise's stuff, I like how the jungle and pirate themes have an upbeat energy throughout, and the cave theme's another highlight. There's this amazing SNES rendition done by the guy making that Anton Blast game, and I urge you to give it a listen. Now, one big thing that didn't translate from DKC are unfortunately the controls. It's a little rough around the edges. I'd be exaggerating if I called it Janky Kong Land or Janky Kang Land, but it has its moments. You best be holding the run button at all times or the Kong's gravity is comparable to that of King Kai's planet. They are heavy. Playing on 3DS, my hands started to cramp and there's no way to remap the controls there. It's also wonky bouncing off enemies. You kind of feel like you're losing control, and if I didn't see solid ground below me, I was fearing for my life. Part of that was because if you're too high off the ground, the game might count it as an abyss and you'll die, even if you were just there a second ago. There's also the big issue of trying to distinguish foreground and background elements. There'll be times where you don't see a platform, or you think you do, leading to a cheap death, and enemies blindsiding you is all too common. Have fun in the caves or this stupid cloud level. I can't stand this one. I still have my old cartridge, so I fired it up on Super Game Boy to see if anything fared different, and there's a couple things. I immediately remembered the music plays at a higher pitch here, but hey, the controls can be remapped, and it felt a lot better than on 3DS. And as you've seen, each stage has a limited color palette. Doesn't really fix the foreground-background issue, but it's something. And I still love mixing and matching all the colors and borders. Whoever decided to make the game over screen red though, I'm thinking they really are trying to scare the kids. Super Game Boy arguably isn't the definitive way to play, but it's still pretty cool. And look at that, my old save files are still kicking. Overall, Donkey Kong Land is a fun time, and a big landmark for DK, Rare, Game Boy. It's good stuff. Just like with DKC 2 and 3, I didn't know about the Land sequels till much later, and it took me even longer to actually play them. We're talking the end of 2022 and the start of 2023, but even now, I don't have much to say on them. I couldn't even find any development stories about them. These just kind of exist. I will say the control feels much better, almost feeling like the SNES games, just a tad floatier. But where Land 1 was a companion piece to Country 1, these feel more like watered down SNES ports. years. Still decent games, but it's sad they lost that identity going forward, especially with the second game. If we're to believe the Game Boy games are their own set of adventures, that means DK got kidnapped again and Crocodile Isle rose back up from the ocean. It also reuses level names from the console games, so it really feels like for this one they went, whatever. Even the demo can't be bothered. The first game actually finishes a whole level, but this one, it ends in 10 seconds after the player gives up all input. Music's still good here. The rendition of Steel Drum Rumba, I could listen to that all day. This game was Grant Kirkhope's first project at Rare, but he's always had the chops. On to Land 3, this went for Roman numerals when Land 2 was numerical, but that doesn't bother me quite as much as the original title screen here. Couldn't even fit the whole land name on one line. Anyway, there's news of a lost world and it's a big deal for adventurers all over, so DK and Diddy head out and leave Dixie to babysit. Feeling especially sexist that day. Having none of that, she and Kitty go to find it before they do. I also want to quickly mention one of this game's designers was Hugh Ward, a QA tester for Rare who's been there for 40 years now, starting back when they were still called Ultimate Play the Game. Like, wow! DK Land 3 is like a mix of the first two games. Locations and enemies are from Country 3, but all the worlds and stages have new names again. Some are pretty clever too, like Coco Channel, Ugly Ducting, and my favorite, Miller Instinct. Bosses and animal buddies are swapped around too. Barbos was the last regular boss in Country 3, but here he's the first, and finding Squawks in a mill or Squitter in the riverbank had me do a quick double take. The Cobble enemies are much more common, and rightfully so. They were the critters of the Northern Cremisphere, yet only showed up in the 3 boardwalk levels on Super Nintendo, but here they do their critter cousins proud. Music was done by Evelyn Novakovic, converting her SNES soundtrack to Game Boy, and big shocker, it's great. Most tracks go for a stronger melody and get an entirely new vibe as a result. I love the original river theme, but the Game Boy one might be my favorite just for that funky beat. Challenge-wise, it's pretty smooth sailing, even with bosses, but what's funny is you'll land the killing blow, then they'll do one more attack and then die. Really, what'll be killing you most is figuring out where to jump, but it ain't as bad as Land 1. And with the Game Boy Color port it got in 2000, that issue's long gone. This one is Japan exclusive since they oddly never got the original, and even now it's Japan only, cause that's just how the world works. Watch them put this on Switch Online and have this port missing, you know there's a 50-50 chance. But after playing the whole trilogy, I'm happy to say they're all still good fun. I wish the sequels kept that weird offshoot feeling the first game had, but I'm glad I finally gave them a go. A worthwhile purchase off the eShop, and yeah, if you're looking to play these in an official capacity and you missed that boat, you might be waiting a bit. And that goes double for the Donkey Kong Country remakes on Game Boy Advance, which have never cropped up on any Nintendo service. A statement I hope gets dated one day. These were done once again by Rare, who at this point had been bought by Microsoft, but since Microsoft had no stake in the mobile market, Rare was free to keep making games for Nintendo's handhelds. If you were a Rare fan with a GBA, you ate pretty good. You got 7 games on this thing. According to an ex-Rare dev who talked with Donkey Kong fan site DK Vine back in the day, these were made from scratch. Yeah, they had some old assets on floppy disks and whatnot, but they were pretty much unusable. Couldn't make heads or tails out of them. So they used a SNES emulator to rip all the old sprites one by one, frame by frame, and taking screenshots along the way. They also put in stuff that was cut from the originals and added in all new content too. New boss patterns, new bosses, mini games, cutscenes, time trials, voice clips. It's an official fan-made ROM hack made by what was technically Nintendo's competition. That's wild! Seeing commercials back in the day, which is how I was made aware of the sequels in the first place, I of course wanted them, though I didn't get a GBA till a friend gave me his in like 2008, and Country 3 was all I had growing up. I didn't play the others till 2023, but I was still well educated on them. I got DKC3 at my local retro game shop in the late 2000s at the low price of, sit down for this one, $14.99 complete in box. And I've still got got the price tag to prove it. You never see games like this go for that low anywhere nowadays. For this video, I bought DKC1 off eBay and it sent me back almost $100. I thought about getting the second game to just complete the set, but I can't start doing that until I get more support on Patreon or something. Link down below! The GBA team set out to match the original SNES physics as best they could, keeping all the tricks you could do before and making sure everywhere you should or shouldn't go was in proper order. For the first game in particular, it gets pretty close, and that's just enough to mess with me. I can beat the original game without ever dying once, but the slightest change in pixels, jump arcs, or whatever did me in. It looks like the original, so in my head I'm thinking it plays like the original, but stages that took me like 1 or 2 minutes on SNES had me on GBA for maybe 6 or 8. Getting footage, I game overed twice, one time having over 30 lives, and I was getting a bit frustrated. Side note, I did find it hilarious dying in water levels because your partner just falls off the screen in slow motion, and it never gets old. Other stuff that threw me off was a missing critter in Barrel Cannon Canyon, and the cartwheel trick in this one bonus? Yeah, you can't do that here. Jumping ahead a bit, I was stuck on Toxic Tower for over an hour in Country 2, and I thought that stage couldn't get any worse. The dev who spoke with DK Vine said it took them till the third game to really nail the original feel, and take it from me, he's totally right. There's even a few segments that feel better here than on SNES. He made note of tweaking controls for Ellie the Elephant and the toboggan sections, but I noticed rope climbing felt a lot better too. Back to the first game, I love what they added here to make it more in line with the sequels. Bonuses are replayable and now have logos and title cards, and bosses have genuine thought put into them. Queen Bee has so many new phases I thought I was fighting King Zing, and fighting both Master Nekis at once for their final encounter was really great too. There's also more background details like little critters crawling on the ground and flying through the air. These frogs though, I look at them and Winky side by side and it's the kind of thing I'll lose sleep over. The colors here are much brighter to make up for the GBA's lack of a backlight. I didn't see a single green critter until the cast roll, and zingers have new colors thrown in the mix, but sometimes things don't look so hot. Orangutan Gang looks like you're on the sun, it's so bright, but when Country 3 came out, the SP and the DS were on the market, so things look much better there. My brother walked in the room and said, "Is this the Super Nintendo version?" That's how you know it looks a lot better. A lot of voice clips for the Kongs and King K. Rool I recognized from DK64, and enemies make new noises too. I do prefer the old universal Kremling death noise, but it's kinda cool how they mix things up here. Though oddly, crooks in DKC2 sound like Dixie Kong when they die. They also did some cool new stuff with the music. Jamie Hughes, a rare composer since Star Fox Adventures, was behind most of the first 2 games' soundtracks, and he worked some serious magic here. GBA obviously had limitations in the sound department, and he made something that doesn't try to eclipse the original soundtracks, but rather complements them. Forest Frenzy and Treetop Rock have remixed melodies and new instruments, but he also did a take on DKC2's Forest Interlude. I was curious how a calm, somber track like that would sound on GBA, but Hughes went for something a little funkier, adding in some percussion, and I think I like it as much as the original. Seriously, give it a listen. But if we're talking the best remake, you probably guessed my vote goes to 3. Honestly, it feels like a whole new game half the time. From the very start, things feel different. That new title theme, for instance, done by David Wise, marking his return to the series with an all-new soundtrack. But you might be asking, why not just use the old one? Well, in interviews, Wise said he couldn't do the original soundtrack justice on GBA, and he only had 6 weeks to do something, so the end result was a much quicker solution. And if you're an audio nut like me, the soundtrack has a few samples in here you might recognize from other places. The beat used in Nuts and Bolts I've heard watching One Piece, and Rockface Rumble's harmonica I heard in a documentary on wolves. Minor distractions aside, the music's pretty great, with some favorites being Jungle Jitter, Mill Fever, Cascade Capers, and the new theme he did for Arik the Spider. Sometimes though, their placement in levels results in all tension just getting sucked right out of them. The river track is pretty much ambience, and in Riverside Race where you're chased by killer bees, yeah, it doesn't really work. Stampede Sprint has a new theme which works well there, but it's also used when the Banana Bird Queen goes after K. Rool, turning that scene into a Benny Hill skit. That cutoff is pretty funny though. If you've thought about how these songs might sound on something better than GBA speakers, check out the channel Drawn and Quartered. This dude's remixes are out of this world, but if you only listen to one, make it Jungle Jitter. That's on a whole nother level. Back to the game, if you're a completionist, there's more than enough here to tide you over. We even got a whole new world in Pacifica. This is where things really feel like a cool ROM hack, and some of the best levels in the game, nay, the trilogy, are stashed away here. This stage even has a scrapped enemy from the original game, Kraka, though you'd never know that since this game's missing a cast roll. You'd also think the new boss Croctopus would be here instead of Barbos. Why do they keep moving Barbos? But don't sleep on Pacifica, it rocks. For minigames, I remember doing Funky's challenges a lot back in the day, and not just because Chunky Kong makes a cameo here. And when I got Rare Replay in 2015 and tried out Cobra Triangle, I got some serious nostalgia because I realized Funky's games were all ripped straight from there. And hey, David Wise did the music there too. I'm baffled this trilogy hasn't been put on any digital storefront, but at the same time, I'm not. I mean, Nintendo put Polarium Advance on Virtual Console while these were MIA, but they deserve more eyes on them, personal bias notwithstanding. They're more than just DKC on the go, they've got enough going to stand on their own. They get my wholehearted recommendation. Find some way to play them if you can, or hope against hope they and the land games show up on Switch Online or something before too long. Now then, what's next for the Donkey Kong Marathon? Well, it's something I've wanted to talk about for a long time. Let's just say the Big Ape has some connections with my native land of Canada, but you'll see exactly what I mean the next time we take a trip to Donkey Kong Country. Oh, screw it, it's the cartoon. We're gonna talk about the cartoon. But hey, I wanna say thanks for giving this video a watch. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, feel free to give it a like, share, subscribe, check out my social media pages, all that stuff I always go on about. And if you wanna see videos like this before they go live on YouTube, as well as some behind the scenes info and art assets, feel free to check out my Patreon page. It's a great way to help support me a bit more directly, if you're in the market for it, of course. And if any of you out there have memories of playing the land games or the GBA trilogy, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And while you're here, check out the videos I got on screen. I really enjoyed making them. Hopefully you'll enjoy watching them. And with all that said, I'll see you guys next time. Later.